Good. All right, so let's go ahead and start. Start at the very beginning. You
Sure.
know, coming across the pond here to the United States.
hmm
So you're from originally
From Hong Kong.
Hong Kong,
hmm
and when did you come across?
It was 1991, I think. Yeah,
Okay,
91. And I was a teenager back then. And it was still British ruled at the time. It hasn't been returned to China.
right,
Um, and so my education, was like mostly, I would say, in the 80s. We learned actually Mandarin and English in class. And so that kind of foreign language skills at the time, which seemed useless, at the time, as a kid, and you're like, whoa, I don't need to speak this.
right.
Um, and that language skills turns out to be so helpful when I came to the United States, because then there turns out to be, obviously English is the first thing, even though everybody who spoke English spoke it too fast for
Oh,
me
I got you.
to understand, which is very normal for some,
Right.
to be learning a foreign language and then go to, like if you and I learn French and we go to France, I'm sure their French is just way too fast to
Well,
understand.
in fact, that's very true because I've learned French. I've had 6 years of French, and when my wife and I went to France, it was like,
Oh my
oh
gosh,
my goodness, we never learned the speed French.
right? The right French. Like, you're like, am I learning the right French?
Right. And
And
the
then,
same and the same thing's true, Joyce. My wife grew up in Colombia speaking
oh
Spanish, right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
she says even today, when she talks to people from Mexico, they speak so quickly she doesn't understand them.
Yes, I hear
Thanks.
that.
Yeah.
Hear that as well. So, that cultural and sort of regional thing that's going on. And for those that are learning English, they will realize. And so when I learned English, it was the British accented English. And
Right.
if you talk to me, I speak American English, and it's because, I came here as a teenager, so I was able to sort of blend my language. And everybody does, even somebody who was born in the UK, came here, and eventually their Queen's English would
Right.
just sort of, get
It-
melded into
yeah.
American English. So, but that was very helpful. That the language skills, and
Now,
I
do you still know Mandarin?
yes, yes, and so I still, back then in San Francisco, which my family first landed, it was mostly a Cantonese speaking city. And it's all because of where the immigrants were coming from. So it was
Right.
more Cantonese. LA is more of a Mandarin speaking city, but the circles that I was in, like the church folks and friend's friend, or this auntie, that uncle's friend, or whatever, some of them would speak Mandarin, and so
Ah,
I would
okay.
continue to have that exposure. But after coming to San Diego, or even in LA, at least, in some of the restaurants, you'll be able to at least hear that, to practice it more. But in
Uh,
San Diego, in the past decade or more that I have been living here, not as much exposure to Mandarin in my circle, the work circle and
right.
whatever. It's all just, English speaking. And so much less opportunity to
So how about when your family and you get together, do you revert to Mandarin or do you just stay in English?
Cantonese. So Hong Kong is a Cantonese, speaking society,
Okay.
or it has been. And so, for other reasons, societal, political, and whatever, it may eventually become, a Mandarin speaking town at some point, because that's the sort of unification of language that is going on from
Gotcha.
Chinese government. So eventually, I'm sure that could happen. But yeah, we would speak Cantonese.
Okay. So is in China, is one the what you call the national language, Cantonese or Mandarin, which is what?
Yeah, they make Mandarin as the official language. I mean, there's so
Okay.
many dialects, and Cantonese had been a major, one of the major languages in China as well. But in terms of, government's official language, that's Mandarin.
Yeah. So in Spanish, I guess the Castilian Spanish from Spain is the more preferred Spanish, and
Ah,
it's not what's taught in most of Latin American countries.
Yeah, yeah. When I was in Barcelona a few years ago, I sort of then learned about the sort of the different Spanish or other dialects that were going around and the political implications of the,
Right, right.
it exists everywhere.
Okay, good. That's fascinating. So language has played an important role in your life.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, from a tool, right? Obviously started as a tool,
Uh-huh.
we can communicate, to where this is interesting as somebody who has English as a second language. So it started as a tool so that you can, order food, you can go to work and communicate with other people. And then you got better over the years, a little bit better. You maybe, work on your accent a little bit, right? First of all, it's just to have a complete sentence, correct sentence, right?
Uh,
Express yourself, clearly. And then it started to be like working on your accent a little bit, working on your fluency so that you can really express how you truly think. And then it
mhm.
gets to a point where, you can start embellishing, or have a more polished way of speaking,
Right.
right? That's why, some people would say, oh, certain politician speaks really well, or whichever celebrity or whichever business person speaks really, really well, and it's because they are able. So to me, I sort of go through that process and be like, oh, maybe I can continue to get better and better, and then you can start becoming inspirational. Right?
Uh-huh.
You can give an inspiring speech more than just a clear speech, an
Right.
inspiring and powerful speech. And so, that's kind of the tier that you can kind of, work
Gotcha. Well, one
your.
of the things I notice about you, and I'm curious, we're on a language thing, so it's kind of interesting, is in China, do the Chinese speak with their hands like you do?
Now, so because I was educated in Hong Kong, British Hong
Uh-huh.
Kong,
Uh-huh.
and I've only been to China once.
Okay.
And so I can't speak for the entire country, and
Yeah.
obviously it's large, and the southern part, northern part, and lots of different custom and stuff. So
Uh,
I don't know what that would be, but I think part of it is because we're in a Zoom. There's really nothing going on. So if it's just the two heads,
uh-huh.
as opposed to like, but if we're in person, we're not like a almost like a video production,
Right.
won't be necessary to make all the movements, but I'm seeing it almost like if I were on a stage, giving
Presentation.
speech or whatever, right, or whatever. I would give a bit more gesture to
Gotcha.
sort of occupy the space.
Okay. So well, you come to the United States, you land in San Francisco. What happens from that point on?
Yeah, so then I went to school for a couple of years there, and then went to college down in LA. So you can see, kept moving down LA,
Okay.
and then worked for a couple of years, and then got another job down in San Diego.
So
And
what did you do in your job in LA?
I was also in IT. So throughout my college years, my parents still being immigrants, it took them a long time to actually land their job. So
Right.
my dad used to be an engineer, and my mom used to be a teacher, credentialed, but those credentials didn't translate. And oftentimes that's the case. Like you may have somebody from Latin America who used to be a nurse, and unfortunately they come here, they can't be credentialed as a nurse. And even I've had aunties, like by aunties we mean female friends of our parents.
Okay.
That's we would call them aunties and uncles, kind of like the Hawaiians. They do the same too. It's kind of, I
Okay.
guess, similar sort of culture. And so they may come from Hong Kong, nurse before head nurse, no less. They came here, they couldn't get credentialed, they have to do the study all over again, which like my parents, they came here when they were in their 40s. And when I was a teenager, I didn't think, well, 40 years old, that's not old.
Right.
It's not ancient, right? It's not like 90 years old where, oh yeah, retirement time and chill. But it turned out that what I heard was, first of all, you didn't have the credential, and then second of all, it would be more expensive to pay for their health insurance,
Oh,
and so they were just not the first choice. So it took them a long time, and they couldn't get the same job. And then afterwards, sort of the byproduct of that was I didn't have much money to go to college, so they didn't pay for my education. They certainly helped in many ways, both
Mhm.
emotionally, both from just giving me the good upbringing,
Right.
and then just helping me with different things, moving and all that stuff. But I more or less borrowed money, which I'm still paying to this day, so long, and still paying for a student loan. And so because of that, I had what was called work study, which I'm sure a lot of foreign students, unless they have come to college here, undergraduate college, like a public school or something, this will be an interesting term. So work study is where you promise to work a certain amount of hours, being paid just like a part-time job, and the cost is actually reimbursed or subsidized by the government. So it is like you indirectly sort of being paid by a student loan, or
Mhm.
not really a loan. It's really a grant, student
Gotcha.
grant, instead of completely free money where you have for a grant. You have work study, which you don't have to return. And then you have, so I did, all three of those. And because of that work study experience, every year, I was kind of stepping up on my skills in IT, which back then it was not called IT, but it was eventually unified to be called IT. And so because of that, by the time I graduated, I was able to actually get a management job. So um, you can say that, oh, bummer, you can't focus on your schooling, which was very distracting because I was just going to work all the time. And
Right.
there was one, or actually 2 quarters, where I worked two jobs, and it was just
Oh,
nonstop. And it affected my grades, but I had a blast at work. It was wonderful. I have worked at anywhere from like a Jewish temple in Beverly Hills. I remember that period very, very fondly. Very, very
uh,
happy time for me. And also a very high-end brokerage firm, stock brokerage firm, also in Beverly Hills. So I would just go back and forth between these two places.
now,
In a,
were those jobs in IT?
yes, yes, they're
So
both in
being an
IT.
IT major at that time,
Mhm.
were you kind of in the minority as a female? Wasn't it more dominated by men at that point?
Yeah, it certainly was. And especially because my major was more formally electrical engineering with
Okay.
a computer engineering, as they call, specialization. Here
Okay.
in UCLA, they didn't actually have IT, which most of the traditional colleges don't. So because of that, I had to learn a lot of like circuits and what I consider kind of boring stuff. And then computer programming, useful, but not exactly what I was gonna do. I didn't think that I would be a programmer, and I'm still
Uh,
not a programmer. I'm doing more of the infrastructure and network and all that. But because
uh,
of those skills were actually helpful in sometimes an indirect way. So today, when I go into an IT project, because of my programming skills before and some side projects that I did, I'm able to, look at my team's work and be able to say, oh yeah, this looks right. This is, on the right track or not. So it's
so
helpful.
when you had these jobs as a
Mhm.
woman,
Mhm.
and it was in a male dominated area, did you encounter any difficulties about, your skill set being kind of in question, if you will?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting question. I almost wanted to say when I was younger, at that time, even though if I look around in the auditorium of an engineering class and
Hmm.
whatever, we have what 200-300 people, um, there might be maybe two or three women in there.
Wow.
Um, Despite that, and despite the fact that then I'm going into computers where it's obviously mostly men, perhaps because I was in such a entry level at the time.
Uh-huh.
First as a student, you're not a threat. So I think when you're not a threat and you're not really occupying the kind of position where they feel like they need to look to you for just that highest expertise, I felt less of that. And because it was
Okay.
an exploratory world, and so everybody had been really, really friendly. And in fact, so when it comes to sort of a gender-based kind of thing, In fact, the older I get, the higher the position I got, the more I encountered it.
Oh, interesting. So even though your expertise was improving and increasing,
That's right.
you were being more challenged as a woman.
Yes, yes.
Interesting.
And sometimes it is not that obvious. So it's not like, let's say if you're the woman, right? They say, it's not like they shut you up or say, I don't think you said it's right. Let me ask the guy next to you, Paul. Do you think so? Right? Do you think Miss Larry, is saying so? It's not so overt, right? So not so obvious.
Right.
Sometimes it's just so. Here's an interesting situation where by that time I already owned my company. So I was essentially the owner going into in a way sales consultation meeting to a potential client, and I brought along with me a slightly older gentleman, my staff, an engineer.
So he was on your staff. He wasn't the owner of the business.
Exactly.
Okay.
He was well dressed, as he should be, and so was I. But because a little older, right? And he's not even a senior engineer. I brought him along so that he could, take a look at the environment and kind of get a feel for that. And I noticed the client on the other side. I would say subconsciously, he really didn't do it on purpose. I truly believe, but just subconsciously, every time he asked the question, he would look to try to get the answer. And regardless of whether it's not even a difficult question, sometimes it's just very simple business stuff. And yet, we came in and we introduced ourselves. So really there's no, and we passed, business cards. And so there was no confusion, but it's just, stuff like that happens. So there are those things where sometimes you just gotta be like, let it roll off your shoulder, right? It happens everywhere. And unless it becomes, something that is that comes out of complete disrespect, that I may speak up, whether it's on behalf of a staff member, right, or a business associate or something. Otherwise, I try not to let it bother me too much, and try to just put in positive change, because I would try to make sure when I review a resume,
Right.
that I give it a fair shot. I don't try to look at the name, because sometimes in America, and this is very interesting, now we're on this topic of American workplace, right? So we know there are many different cultures and races in America.
Right.
And sometimes a person's name, obviously last name, says a lot, right? Unless they change their last name or they married somebody, from a different race. A lot of times, you look at it, you immediately have a preconceived notion of
Absolutely.
who is this person, right? Is it a younger guy, or is it a older woman or something, right? Because in America, like in also many countries, but in America, there are first names that are more popular during a certain generation, right? Like, let's say the first name Joyce is actually an older, tends to be older, but now with the millennials and the Gen Ys, Gen Zs, actually
it's coming back.
I'm seeing that happening. But let's say the first name Mabel, or let's see what other names. So let's just say Mabel, right? And so that's like, it turns out, oh wow, you don't see very young girls using that name. Brittany, you don't see like an 80-year-old lady using the name Brittany. So there are those things. So I try to, when I review resumes, try to not read that yet, and just read the content.
Very good.
By their merit. So
very good. Now, as you progress through your career from being in IT as a provider of services to a manager, and then ultimately the owner of a business, did you see that you developed certain managerial skills and ways of conducting yourself as a leader?
Yeah. So this is interesting in a sense that I obviously did not I was not born with a silver spoon, right? I was not born rich
Right.
to where, oh, I'll just go into my dad's company and I'll be the managing director, right? So I started from the absolute bottom. I was, like laying cables, crawling underneath desks because my boss would tell me to do that. And that's what you do as a student worker. Now, what that meant was that you are starting from a place where you are the individual contributor, right?
Right.
So all your effort, you're being measured by your very own, effort. And so you can be a perfectionist and have high expectation of yourself, and you deliver very high throughput, very high quality of work. Then later on, you become maybe a supervisor or a team lead or a manager, then you're responsible for more people, right? And
Right.
so you're no longer just what you put in. It's very important then what your team is able to contribute.
Right.
And sometimes you may have stronger players, sometimes you have weaker players. Then you gotta just make sure that works. And now as a company owner, it becomes even more complex, right? Even more dimensions that you would have to consider. You may have somebody who is a very good individual contributor, but they may
Right.
not be a good manager, right? Let's say you have a perfectionist, and you put a perfectionist who is unforgiving as a manager. That's not a good manager.
Yeah, exactly.
The manager needs to see who has maybe a weakness and maybe complement that with somebody who has the strength and the dynamics. And then as a company owner, you got to identify who are the right leads, right? And then how do you put them together? And so what I found was I was also going through this evolution where I had to abandon some of my perfectionist beliefs.
Oh,
um,
as an individual contributor.
Yes, exactly. And
Gotcha.
slowly as I progressed, and because right after college, I was already in managerial position. So it hit me quick that,
Uh-huh.
oh my gosh, now I am managing everybody who's older. So for most of my working life, in management, I was managing people that were older. I was hiring people that were older than me.
Uh-huh.
And I had to understand that, being a perfectionist doesn't actually work. And so over time I understand, oh, okay, well, let's hire, let's recruit, let's hire somebody who is really good at this job, make sure. And as they call it in this in this very successful, very good business book, I believe it was Good to Great, is you hire the right people, right, put them on the bus. And then I would go even further as to put them in the right seat,
On the
you
bus.
know, and so then they can really be empowered to
Right.
be the best that they can be. And that is important. So when somebody is in a company, they can be very good, but if they're being put in the wrong position, then they cannot be as good as they can
Well,
actually
as the
be.
leader, if your analogy, were you the driver of the bus?
I would say so. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And so because I decide on the direction of the overall, right? The
Uh-huh.
overall direction for the buzz, and everybody I'm responsible, right, for their well-being. Sign their paycheck. And so I
Right.
got to make sure this bus is not heading off the cliff at a
Gotcha.
minimum.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
And
So
then that
it's
move as fast as everybody is comfortable and capable of moving.
right. So assume I'm an employee of yours
Mhm.
and I'm onboarding with you. Do you have a
Mhm.
process to bring me on board and kind of assure me and you that I'm going to be successful? Is there a process that you go through from a management standpoint?
Yeah. So I believe there are companies, especially in IT, there are companies that believe in certifications, industry certifications.
Okay.
I think that's one way of, if you have 100 applicants or 1,000 applicants, right? You gotta have some minimum, right? That might be one way.
Okay.
I tend to see it as a bit of a lazy way. So especially if you are in a company, let's say a startup, right? A company where the owner or the founder or the top management really can get to know everybody that you bring on board.
Right.
In-person interview and really the interaction, that is more important than any certification.
Gotcha.
But that is not to say certifications are not important, because if you try to get a job in government or in a big corporation, they're going to require, because simply they have that many applicants. They want you to at least be able to complete something basic. And so for me, as a small business owner, and then starting a startup, to me what's really important is, can they come in and would have a good grasp of what is it that we're doing? Do we have similar beliefs? And then obviously I would have some technical questions to ensure that they can handle the kind of situational stuff, which would actually combine soft skills and hard skills. So soft skills would be skills that are like dealing with people, communication, right? So in IT would be, okay, if all of a sudden your client's computer system went down, everybody's out of work, what would you do, right? And so the hard skill is, you got to have the technical skills to actually fix it, right? To identify what might be the issue, sort of step by step. So I want to know, what's the thought process of stepping through it? But the soft skills,
right?
You can't just go in and fix the stuff. You got to address the client. Maybe you go around and tell, the department heads that, hey, we got to have this going, ETA, which means, estimated time of arrival, or estimated time of completing the repair would be X amount of time, and I'm going to, update you. So there will be those kinds of things, which to me is more important. And I think whether it's in a big corporation or in a smaller business, these skills are going to be universal.
Right. And I think a lot of times what they're referring to is your emotional quotient. Your ability to really interface and interact with other individuals in a positive manner.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I have also added in later years, not only because on one hand, it's important for me to understand who I'm bringing on board. And there are times when I know if they need to really work very closely in a team, I would make sure the team gets to interview the person too.
Oh, good idea.
But right, so then they also get a feel for it. There are pros and cons, and but I think we'll leave that to a manager's summit or something.
Okay.
That we discuss the pros and cons. Now, what is interesting that I've started to introduce is, I want everybody to sort of understand each other's work style.
Right.
And so I started doing unofficial personality tests and then publish it. So as long as they are on board, so this is after they are hired, they do a personality test. So other people understand that, well, some people, some of your coworkers may be very detail oriented. Mm-hmm. Some of your coworkers are more creative minded and just understand each other's strengths and weaknesses. So
which test do you use for this personality profile?
I think it's called, Myers-Briggs.
Myers-Briggs, yeah, okay.
Yes. And so so there are different tests out there, and some of them are kind of fun. They would compare you to, hey, you are like Gandalf in or like, I don't know, you're like Meryl Streep or something. And
right.
So it's kind of interesting for people to use.
One of the nice things about the Myers-Briggs too is that if you're a certain type and I'm a certain type, it doesn't mean that one's better than the other, because part of the test tells you, Larry, this is how to best interact with Joyce, giving your managerial style, and vice versa. So it really teaches us that the holistic approach to how we get along, as opposed to there's just one style and it's the only style that's right.
Absolutely. And that helps a lot, because over time as a business owner, I can see that there are, there are personalities within the company where right. I know that one person starts to get annoyed by the other, because right. the other is, sometimes a little, forgetful, and they're not detail oriented, but the other, it's like, right on the spot with things, always writing down things. Now, they both have something to learn from each other,
right.
Because it turns out in this particular case, this person who sometimes is forgetful is super good with the client, with even the most demanding client, because of their soft skills in communications and all that stuff, right? While this person is really putting the head down and all that. So I wanted them to learn what, and not me telling them.
Right.
Allow them to be, in an environment, sort of discover, I know this guy's forgetfulness is kind of annoying, but that other side of him actually is good for the whole team.
Right. Well, the thing is, that's a great segue to the whole concept of diversity, because it's been proven that the more diverse our workforce is, including these social skills, the better our performance as a company is overall. And if we're all the same, if we're all Joyce Tangs, it's going to be a boring environment. You know what I mean? Not that you're a boring person, but if we all look the same and act the same, gosh, where's the fun in the diversity, you know?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And we would have the same weaknesses, right? And
right,
so, yes, we would be missing the exact same stuff. And
right.
that's
Exactly. Very good. Well, that's good. In terms of over time, as you've been in business, what do you say, about 20 some years, have you
Mhm.
seen a change in the business norms, I'll call them, how people dress, how they interact? Uh, the COVID is a good example of how business behaviors have changed. You're doing meetings and the top of you looks pretty good, but I'm in shorts and sandals at the
Right.
bottom here.
Yep, yep.
And
Yeah.
when I started in business, I started probably long before you. Uh, I went to work in a three-piece suit,
Oh, three P's.
a
Oh,
three-piece, a vest. In fact, our PepsiCo uniform, if you will, was a blue suit, white shirt, red tie. And if
ah,
you'd have go to a meeting, you'd have thought that that was the uniform of the day. But everybody did it, Joyce. I walked in, I couldn't believe it. And so I
right.
had an array of red ties to go with my blue suit.
An array of red ties. Yes. Like how many reds can you have? But yeah.
Exactly.
Oh,
Well, you had the pinstripes, you had the
right.
solid red, it's just
Yeah.
amazing.
The burgundy, versus the
So
bright.
in terms of your experience over time, have you seen changes in business norms, whether it's the culture, whether it's the dress, the attire, how we
Mhm.
interact with each other? My students, for example, particularly from Japan and China, have said
Mhm.
that it's much more formal there.
Yes.
They dress up to go to work still,
Mhm.
even the young people. It's a hierarchical organization where they do what they're told by the boss,
Yes.
and there's not a lot of interaction and not a lot of feedback from below. So your experience over your time here in the workplace in
Yeah.
America.
Absolutely. So I don't know about your other interviewees, whether they also have that experience, but for me, before I started my first job here in the United States, even as
Uh,
a student job, my first job actually was in Hong Kong. So
okay.
so I was there again in my teenage years. So as a teenager, I came over here. And then there was one summer where my uncle, who was running a business in Hong Kong, said, "Hey, why don't you come over here, just be a student intern, and spend your summertime, right? And just sort of work and whatever." So I went over there, did that, and I had my exposure in working in an Asian work environment. Now,
Uh-huh.
and it was, work was 6 days, 6 days a week, not 5 days a week.
Wow.
So that set me up for, sort of work life where, I gotta say, like working life in the United States, even at its hardest time, um, uh, I would say, Hong Kong started, gave me that training, that summer job, because, I'd be, at work, and usually they would start a little later, like let's say 9 o'clock, and then I'd be helping them out, and it was so much fun that I would leave, 8, 9 o'clock at night, and
Wow.
and
Six
then
days a week.
yeah, and then so Saturday is the half day. It's like, oh yes, half day. So they are happy that it's a half day, right? And here, because the tradition is Monday to Friday, you
Right.
don't want to work on Saturday.
Right.
And so that obviously is hard for you. And if you really think about it, after being in workforce for so long, that is such a long period of your life that you are
Right.
spending, in the company. So now, with that perspective, I of course also have the perspective of the life here. Now, in California, we tend to be quite casual,
Hmm.
but I also work with government contractors and government officials. So in my company, not only do we work with commercial clients, which tend to be relatively relaxed because they're scientists, and such. When we work with government, it will be like you, had to be all suits. And then everybody that we go in to see, they would have a tie. And I like the two. The change. It's kind of interesting. So usually when I am just going to see a client, uh, since I kind of talked about how, I already, look young, I was young, and being Asian, sometimes, we tend to look a little younger,
Yeah.
than our maybe Caucasian American peers. And so when we do that, I want to make sure I'm being respected. And so I think one thing is always universal, regardless of where it is in the world, is that if you dress properly and respectfully, you get a bit more respect. And so
Gotcha.
my sense is the younger you are, the more properly dressed you should be. And it doesn't mean like, oh, maybe somebody who is 19 years old needs to do a three piece.
Right. I gotcha.
But certainly, a proper shirt, collared shirt would be way better than just going in with a wrinkled polo shirt and
Right.
wrinkled khaki, right? So I certainly believe that if you do that, that's a good impression. And that impression goes a long way. And we tell people, don't judge a book by its cover, right? Which means don't just look at somebody, how they look on the outside and just believe that, oh, I know what they're going to say, or I know who they are, whatever, right?
Uh,
But unfortunately, we are also human beings. And a lot of times, the first thing you see, it's that first impression. Oh, how this person
Absolutely.
looks.
Yeah.
And so if they are more properly dressed, they carry themselves with confidence, and not like t-shirts and flip-flops,
Hmm.
then there tends to be, a bit more trust in, or at least a little bit more confidence when they are making let's say, a suggestion, a proposal, or something. And you're right, the top down, I certainly feel that. I see the difference between the two. And in California, we are even more of and especially in technology, we're more of a teamwork, collaborative
Right.
environment.
And a
Than
flatter organization too, wouldn't you say?
absolutely. So because of most of my working life, I have, now been in California, I use this way. So when I work with my offshore team, my international team that are maybe in India, or other places, I tend to use the American way to work with them. But I also, still remember, that summer job that I had when I was a teenager,
Right.
how things were. And so I believe melding of the two, really, would be good. You need to have good leadership, but you also need to have a leader who would listen to everybody and anybody, who can give good input, right? That's
Interesting. So one of the things I take away from that is similar to one of my philosophies when I coach people who are going out for a job interview is remember, you're always on stage.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter whether you think you are or not. As soon as you arrive at that building, whether it's the receptionist downstairs, the people you run into in the elevator, if you're going upstairs, as soon as you meet the person, they are judging you continuously. And you know what? We can't help it, Joyce. That's what we do.
Yeah, right. We were just kind of the overall evolution. We look around. It used to be,
Yeah,
oh, we're in the forest. We look around for tigers or
right.
crocodile or something, and make sure we're safe. And
Yeah,
we're always making decisions.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
and to that, I would say, since you mentioned about interview, I have done interviews where I'm giving the interview as the to a job candidate, and because it was remote, they were not respecting the occasion. There was one time I was doing it over the phone, and I could basically hear the other side munching on potato chips.
Oh my goodness.
So you hear the, and then you hear, and then there was also another time where when I give job interviews over the phone, I would sit down properly on my desk. I don't, do other things because I want to give them respect. There was also a time where the other side was driving a car, not because of an emergency. Now, this was an appointment spot that they had booked freely and would be able to change freely. It was not because there was an emergency, but they decided they want to do the interview in a car because it happened to be remote. Now that with COVID and we're doing this, over Zoom, I also notice that there are people who are not, really giving the meetings the kind of respect
Right.
that it warrants. I have friends who are physicians, and they're doing telemedicine. So, doing their doctor's visit over either a almost like a Zoom kind of thing over
Right.
video call. And there are so many patients that would do that while they're driving, or they are just doing something else, which
Ah,
please, stop the car and not, not be like doing this halfway and talking to your doctor. It's an actual visit, right? So I think it needs that respect, and it becomes more productive, because otherwise it's so easy to get distracted, especially if there's no image, right? And I certainly advocate this kind of more convenient virtual interaction.
right.
Sometimes you miss a little, but this is also very telling. If somebody can respect what seems to be a casual environment, it says a lot.
Yeah,
So
it
it's
does. It really does.
those little things that, if I were to tell my younger self, is pay attention to those little things. Because if you have a good boss, a good leader, they see it, they identify it, and they would champion you because they know you're detail oriented for those little things that you care about.
Well, you're hitting on a topic that's kind of interesting there too, Joyce, is if you had to state the values that you particularly admire in a candidate, that says, okay, students, these are things that I would value as a manager hiring somebody. What are the kind of characteristics, forget the technical side, because most of these people are IT folks, but in general, Joyce, what are the kind of things that you look for in a
I would say number one, attitude.
candidate? Okay.
So there's attitude and there's aptitude. So, right, attitude, we know what it is. Aptitude is sometimes a less used word. So that's your ability to do.
Right.
Aptitude, your knowledge, and so forth. And sometimes, that is missing, right? And so let me move it a little bit. So that is, if you have good attitude, you can learn everything and anything you need to.
Right.
And if you, let's say, fail in a project or whatnot, you will always be able to pick up from there, and
Right.
you'll do a good job. If you don't have good attitude, you can be a rock star to start with, but then you're gonna top out. Essentially, that's it. And so attitude, it is big for me. I
Okay.
always hire for that. But then, of course, somebody who would be collaborative would be good. And especially in this environment, being collaborative is a big thing.
Right. Right. Well, especially because they have to interact with the clients on such a close basis too, right?
Yep, exactly.
So attitude and collaborative. Anything else?
Um, I think being entrepreneurial is something that is valued today. And even in sort of the more conservative countries, in terms of workplaces where, oh yeah, the boss does everything. But if you are entrepreneurial and you come to your boss with a good idea, a lot of times it's not going to be turned down.
Interesting.
Like it. And I know there are bad bosses where they would just take it as their own.
Uh-huh.
But you'll be the right-hand man or woman of
Right.
that person.
So describe entrepreneurial, because it's not one that I've heard before from somebody, so describe entrepreneurial. I don't consider myself entrepreneurial. I know how to guide an entrepreneur. And I think I've told you before, I can take any idea and make it better. I just have a hard idea coming up with the original concept.
So I would say, nowadays where we hear so many, news about news articles and whatever, where people are like, oh, so and so, founded this company, so and so fundraised, however much, right?
Right.
But we need entrepreneurial, the spirit, the creativity, the innovation.
Okay.
And so what I see is there is, you can be entrepreneurial in creating a company, but you can also be in a big corporation, right? And bring in sort of that spirit. And that is, what that means is, don't be a robot. like I was told to march left, right, right, and that's it, right?
Right.
You can think about, well, besides marching, what else can I bring to the team? And and even though I'm not creating a company out of it, maybe that would benefit the company
Gotcha. Gotcha.
as a
So
whole.
really, it's that creative mindset that says, I'm going to think outside the proverbial box, if you will, that you're
Yeah,
looking for. Now, one
exactly.
that's important to me that you didn't mention is integrity. Maybe it's a given to you, but to me, it's at the top of my list.
Right.
And I'm going to tell you how I define integrity. It's not the same as honesty. It's that
Mm-hmm.
you will do what you say you're going to do. That's
Mm-hmm.
integrity to me. So
Yeah.
if you commit to something, then it's my expectation, once we've agreed that that's where we're going to go, that you're going to do it. That's
Right.
integrity.
Absolutely.
And too many people assume that, well, that's he's not going to look at that later on. He's going to forget about it. I don't. I don't
Oh
forget. I
yeah.
write it down. And what really is a telling thing to me is if you and I are talking
Mm-hmm.
and you and I have agreed to something, you haven't written it down, I know you're not going to stick to it. I know right away that you didn't think what we talked about was all that important.
Yep.
And so that's a real telltale sign for me in an interview is somebody says, well, Larry, we're really going to go down and we're going to do A, B, C, and they're writing A, B, C, and D. I
Yeah.
know that when they write, because I ask them, send me a note back what you've committed to.
Yeah.
They're going to tell me. But if I say that and they can't send the note back, they weren't committed.
Right. And I also see integrity as even when they're stuck in a hard place,
Uh-huh.
they come through.
Absolutely.
And so if they were wrong or whatever it is, they were shortchanged or whatnot, they still come through because
Mm-hmm.
they made that promise. Now, I think what's challenging is that if you're hiring somebody, because a lot of times, what I value, I think I also take it as sort of evaluating that as I bring them on board.
Mm-hmm.
Lack of integrity, or integrity is difficult to evaluate when you're interviewing somebody, but that comes through.
You'll
Uh,
know it if you see it.
exactly. And so in Chinese, there's a proverb that says, when the road is long, when the journey is long, the strength of your horse, right?
Ah,
So you would only do it when you ride your horse over a long journey. Then whether this is a horse that, again, another sort of Chinese name for it is a horse that can go 1,000 miles or not, right?
right.
And so that happens with people, and so I would say lack of integrity is a fireable offense.
Oh,
Fire.
I agree. I agree 100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Uh-huh.
And it becomes sort of a ticking time bomb in a team because you never know, when they might actually throw people under the bus. That's like
Right.
an easy one to easy one to tell when somebody has no integrity, right?
Well, another part of what you said kind of struck me, Joyce, which is, if they can go the long haul. But
Mm-hmm.
the other thing is you are going to have a bump in the road as you're going along. And I want you to be willing to come to me and admit that, you don't have to hide it because I'm here to help. I'm not here to critique. Oh, wow, you should be perfect. You're not going to encounter any issues. No, let us know because that's how we can help as a team. And
Yeah,
too many people, pride or lack of integrity gets in the way of being honest about the impediments in their road, if you will.
exactly.
I want to change topics for a minute. I want you to kind of put on your future hat, okay? I'm interested in your thoughts about jobs that may disappear and jobs that may come in the future. And on the latter, what kind of skill sets are we going to be looking for those future jobs? So first of all, give me a kind of a picture of things that you think are going to disappear. And I'll start with a couple of examples. We've seen that the publishing industry is really suffering. Newspapers have gone out of business almost uniformly throughout the US.
Mhm.
Magazines are almost non-existent now anymore, and everybody looks to the internet. So
Yeah.
those are examples of things that have gone away. Um, Things that are going to come into the future could be things like artificial intelligence. How is that going to affect the way we conduct business in certain arenas? So
Mhm.
that's just to get you started in your thinking. But let's start with the things that you think might disappear because of technology changes or, we're all moving in a different direction we're getting out of horses and starting to drive cars.
Yeah. I mean, just like the Industrial Revolution that we had decades ago, right? That
Uh-huh.
really did away with many sort of basic, labor intensive jobs back then, and then we had the booms of factories and so forth. I think still today, the biggest threat, or one of the biggest danger to the workforce, is the labor intensive jobs. Those are
Okay.
always going to be the first one to go, unfortunately,
Okay.
because it is expensive, especially in America. It's very expensive to have labor, right? To have
Uh-huh.
and so those would be, and it may not just go down to zero. It may simply just be, instead of 100, now we need five, and that is severe enough.
Right.
Um, and I also believe, yes, I agree with you that the media is a completely different world these days now, right?
Right.
That's gonna go. Some people would speculate that with AI, are we not going to have doctors anymore, right? At least, radiologists who are reading these films, maybe just AI would read all these x-rays.
Mm-hmm.
I would say sometimes medicine is as much an art as it is a science, and vice versa. And so that's going to take a while, and also a while to perfect that. But there's going to be a lot of stuff that, let's say if somebody is applying for a loan, mortgage, that process of dealing with that mortgage paperwork
Right.
uh, is always very labor intensive. Those people are going to be gone. It will be very dangerous. Real estate agents, um, at some point, the Zillows and the Redfins of the world are going to be really replacing and be able to charge less. And what would sellers of homes do? They're going to go to Redfin if they think that they can still get the house sold similar price,
Well,
right?
in that vein, Joyce, my daughter's looking for a home right now, and
Mhm.
now you don't need a real estate agent because they have virtual tours of the home
Absolutely.
that literally walks you through every detail without ever going to see it. Now, obviously, before you make an offer, you're going to want to see it in person. But I think you're right. A lot of the transactional stuff is going to disappear.
Absolutely. And so COVID, and with this virtual, because it used to be, oh my God, house is often the most expensive purchase that someone would buy, right? Would
Right.
have in their entire life. And you don't have too many of those. So it's not like, oh, I know I'm gonna, go get another one, right?
Right. Exactly.
So you never hone your skills. So it used to be that you need to have a good guidance, like
Uh-huh.
a Sherpa, right? Which is like a guide to
Right.
guide you through the process. And I remember when I bought my first home in my 20s, I knew nothing. And my parents have never bought a home in the United States. So I had nobody to give me tips on what to do. I had to really rely on the agent. And at the time, there were some online listings. So I was kind of, using that and then using my agent. But then since then, it has practically been, online. And I located my home, like my home today, which I've lived in for 11 years now.
Uh-huh.
I saw it online, looked at the pictures, came check it out. So the agent really didn't do much. And so, over time, like, I mean, in the next couple of years, so with COVID, now we don't even need to go in to see the home, right? Because sometimes
Right.
you can have the opportunity. That's going to train people into sort of believing their virtual tour and be comfortable with it. Because a lot of
Right.
times, comfort level. So if you're able to do that with the biggest purchase in your life,
Right. Exactly.
right? So it changes. So it's dangerous for real estate agents, that they need to be imaginative and entrepreneurial, so that they can figure out, how can I really leverage this platform so that I can be the conductor of this orchestra, right? And
Right.
not just be like gone or replaced, but then you could truly leverage these and then give an additional value add to your client. So that's, going to be a challenge for them.
Gotcha. So how about the future? What do you see as happening in the future workplace in terms of uh, either industries and or jobs that are going to come on the market? And what are the skill sets that are going to be required of people that need to go into those jobs?
Yeah. So in the 2000s, we saw the booming of the Silicon Valley boom,
Right.
and how, or actually boom and bust, right? So it was really late 90s, 2000s, and at that time the dot coms were all the rage. It was, whoa, dot com, buy a stock, you can't lose. And then suddenly AI, it's like everybody's saying, oh, I got AI here, I got AI there. And what I saw was a bit of a comparison, that it's like back then you can just tag on a .com onto anything, and it just seemed like it would become $1 million brand,
Right.
even when there's no substance, right? And so I'm seeing a little bit of that. Like people would just say, "Oh, we got AI in here," and so it's important to really then distinguish: are you really leveraging AI, or are you just sort of saying it? You just have some analytics and then claim it to be AI. It's very different, right?
Absolutely.
And so as AI, true AI become, and predictive analytics, and the whole machine learning, the whole sort of let's just say the bucket of technology, complementary technology, as it matures, and it gets applied in the workplace in a day-to-day perspective, then it is really going to replace a lot of people. And AI is going to be like when we go to Amazon.com and buy stuff. It's just every day. So it is going to be part of our everyday living.
So will
And
that create jobs though too, Joyce, at the same time? Will that the evolution and the implementation of AI across industries bring more jobs to industries in that regard?
yeah. So then the next step is for people, how do you harness it, right? And then it's easy for people who are relatively easy for people who are in technology, right? Because you can say, oh, of course, go do data science because AI requires a bunch of data. So if you're able to do this and that, right? And then you set yourself. Now, what's going through my mind is I wonder, for your students, what kind of area they're in. Not everybody's going to be in technology. If
Right.
you're not in technology, how do you, right, maximize your chance of success in your next, however many decades of career?
Right.
um, I would say getting some basic understanding of what technology would be is important, because
Okay.
as we know, technology is going to become, it's going to occupy a bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger chunk of our work lives. Just like computer, I remember when I was in high school, there were still plenty of companies where there was not even a single computer on their desk,
Right. Right.
right? And then now we have computers on our cell phone. And
Right.
I want to say, like, if I'm trading stocks, I'm trading stocks on my cell phone because the app is well written and I can do it so much quicker, so fast, right? And so for those who are not in technology, I think it's important to still understand that and know that you can be a power user of technology.
Okay.
Wield technology as though it is a knife or a sword, and use that well in business, then then
Ah, okay.
then you have a secure spot. So now if somebody says, I lay bricks, right? I'm doing labor. Well, it's going to be quite tough, unless you're a high quality craftsman, like an artisan, right? Then you're an artist. But if it's, if let's say somebody's wanting to go into accounting, right? Then I would recommend that, okay, accounting, great, but understand that you want to not be stuck in the spot where the basic sort of bookkeeping would be replaced by software or robotic stuff, right?
Right.
Here you head up, you know, give yourself that upgrade and make sure you aim for that so that you become the wielder of technology.
Well, that's a good way to look at it. Another way that I tend to look at something that you just said was that there's the developers of the technology,
Mm-hmm.
and those are techies. There's
Mm-hmm.
the users of technology, and then there's the mega users that teach everybody how to maximize the use of technology. But
Mm-hmm.
what I hear you saying is you need to build your base of skills in technology to know where you're going to land, but you're going to need to be in one of those three boxes eventually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
very good.
Because there's always going to be intersection between business and technology.
Yeah.
And as much as I'm a techie, I'm in the technology world, I don't see it as, oh, technology must be great, or those that are in technology would have all the jobs in the world. Because I think there's just so much here outside of technology. In fact, it's almost like everywhere else.
Uh-huh.
But because technology it's like utilities. It's
Uh-huh.
it's like saying using a powered machine, right? Back then, before, when there was no powered machine versus powered machine,
Right.
it's essentially like, well, how to use this power machine? Well, then you got to make sure that you know how to do it. You don't need to be the creator of it,
Right.
but you know how to maximize it, and be that bridge. There's always this spot, like the Venn diagram. There's always this spot in between, where, if you have skill sets on both, you don't need to be like a mega technology genius or whatever, right? Or you don't need to be like a big business person. You can have develop very good, strong skills in the middle, and
Uh-huh.
that's very marketable.
Gotcha.
And
Okay. Very good. Well, we've covered a lot, and I told you I try to keep it at about an hour. And I think with our little start at the beginning, we just did that. And we covered everything that I really wanted to get into. Um, One last comment
Mhm.
is how do you feel about the ethical nature of business?
Hmm.
Now, over time, we've had certain laws, Sarbanes-Oxley and others, that have tried to come in and impose ethics on business because business didn't behave properly.
Mhm.
You've had the scandal with Enron, for example, that really drove a lot of changes in proper financial reporting, but also ethical behavior in terms of the way we treat our employees and so on. So,
Mhm.
talk to me a little bit about how you've seen ethics enter into the workforce and affect you or your workplace.
Hmm. Um, when you mentioned about those scandals, of course, the first thing I thought about was corporate greed. And corporate greed is a common phrase after all of these, major scandals
Right.
where a lot of people lost their money, right? And a lot of them are small investors because, simply it's the company that they work at, and they're like, oh my God, my company is so successful. I'm going to keep buying their stock, or that's their retirement or whatever. Their lives were essentially destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there are people who walked away with tens of millions, right? Hundreds of millions at the same
Right.
time. Um, Unfortunately, in the society, if we reward based on corporate performance and all that, that's, right, you're going to get what you measure, right?
Right.
And so that's still going to happen. And so what's important is, there needs to be some sort of self-policing, and of course integrity comes in as well,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
at the core, at the absolute core of it. um Nowadays, we hear a lot more about being socially responsible. So there are many sort of younger startups and so forth where they're like, we cannot do evil, or we need to give back at the same time.
Right.
uh, all those things are good. And if we, the younger generation of leaders that are coming through are keeping that in mind, because I do believe, well, if you do hard work, you get rewarded. what what's wrong with that, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong, and
Right.
that is what, our human natures are about, right? You go hunt, and you have better skills, and you, let's say, hunt throughout the day, and you bring home, like, I don't know, three rabbits, for example. Great,
Uh,
and you have three rabbits to eat, as opposed to the other guy who's like, they're either don't have good skills, or they're just lazy. Let's just say they're lazy. Didn't want to spend time hunting. Well, then they come home with nothing,
or
right?
they're going to wait for the rabbits to run by them.
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, no, I'm just gonna chill under a tree, and so if a rabbit comes by, then I'll get one.
Yeah.
So I certainly still think it's very important. Now, it's debatable whether, wow, these mega CEOs, when they have these scandals within their companies, that clearly they made a mistake, and yet they still are able to walk away with tens of millions of dollars. Now, these are money that could have gone to for other much better use, but they
Right.
have a severance package. you know, as people call it, the golden parachute.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Well, you know, I take some issue with that in
Right.
those kinds of situations. But if a company, you know, does things right, has great performance, you know, I would say everybody should be rewarded, and there will be some with the bigger and some of the smaller rewards, but everybody should get the fruit of the work. It's going to take a lot more sort of internal policing, you know, and a leader with high integrity to
Right.
lead the entire company. Sometimes it would seem like, wow, in the big corporation of, let's say, 20,000 people, why would one person make such a big difference? But the thing is, if you have a very respectable CEO, they are going to have policies, and not just written empty words, but they would enforce it. They would live it. They would breathe it. They would not have crazy weird parties that would create scandals.
Right.
And they would, you know, practice, you know, stay on the right side of the law, and have good practices, and that everybody would be influenced positively. And but if you you know, have people on the top that are always thinking of ways to weasel out of stuff because that's just who they are,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to affect the rest of the company,
Yeah.
and would allow a lot of these things to happen.
Well, there's a lot of evidence that's shown in studies that the most ethical companies are the ones that tend to have the longest term, highest performance level overall. In other words, if you looked at the Fortune 500 and you looked at integrity, the ones that had the highest level of integrity had a 12% annual return versus 6% for those who didn't.
Great.
And 12% annual return is a pretty decent return for a
Oh,
corporation.
yes,
So,
yes.
yeah.
And that's good, right? So it's having these kinds of data that actually says, hey, this is in fact, you know, the turtle actually goes farther than, you know, than the rabbit. That's
Yeah.
you know, cheating and whatnot.
Right.
And I mean, we've certainly seen, you know, Anderson, is it Anderson Consulting, or is it Arthur Anderson,
Uh-huh.
accounting firm that was doing it, you know, that was servicing
They
Enron.
were doing Enron. They went away.
That's right. That's right. Right.
Yeah.
All these and you know, uh, let's hope that we don't see more of these, because I think there's a saying, you know, is it when the tide goes away, you know who is swimming naked. Have you heard of that?
No, I've not heard of that one. That would be very true, though.
Yep, exactly. So
That's a good one. I was going to say, when the tide goes away, you know where the seashells are.
that's another way to see it.
Joyce, I want to thank you for your time. You were very enlightening with sharing your thoughts about the workplace and your career. And as always, it's a joy to talk to you, and I really enjoyed your time.
Same here.
All
Thanks
right.
for
Well,
having me.
take care of yourself and good luck. And if you move into semi-retirement, let me know. I may join you on a dive somewhere.
Ooh, yeah. Wish me luck.
Take care, Joyce. Bye-bye.